Joining us now, James Zogby, president of the Arab American Institute. Jim, as always, we appreciate your time Skyping in. The neighborhoods around Paris are being described as no-go zones where both tourists and cops are afraid to travel. Why has there been such a striking lack of assimilation in Paris and around France?
Well, largely because France does not assimilate. Look, America does, and that's the difference. That's who we are. There's a lot of talk here about developing a counter-violent strategy. We already have it. It's called becoming an American. Within a generation, you become an American. We've assimilated generations of people who came here with anarchist ideas and communist ideas and fascist ideas, and they become American. Their kids become involved in our popular culture, and they develop not just a new identity, but a new sense of purpose. That doesn't happen in France. You're there for 3 generations, and you're still an Arab. You're still looked at as Algerian. Even in England, I recall being there after one of the recent elections, and the story in the Sunday Times said, historic election, 23 immigrants won seats in the parliament. Well, I knew some of those guys. They'd been in London for three generations, and yet they were still called immigrants. I had a debate with somebody in Germany a while back, and she kept referring to the immigrants. They were Kurds from Turkey who'd been there for 3 generations, but would never be German. Now, Merkel has taken the right step by saying we are all German and committing herself to that. France has to commit itself to that too. I am not absolving, of course, in any way the horrendous violence, but understand that France has a problem, and that is that it doesn't assimilate because it doesn't expand the definition of being French to include other groups.
James, also in 2004, the French government passed a law that was prohibiting wearing religious apparel in public schools, such as headscarves. That law spurred demonstrations all around the world. Do you think laws like this are fueling that inability to assimilate France's Muslim population, or are they necessary to ensure national security? Your thoughts?
Look, you know, I am not a fan of wearing niqab. I'm not a Muslim, but I think that, you know, there are security reasons and there are identity reasons. And I just know there's nothing in Islam that requires a woman to cover her face. There actually are Muslims who will argue convincingly that there's nothing in Islam that requires you to cover your hair. But for those who decide that they want to, I mean, I grew up in a Lebanese and Italian immigrant neighborhood. Women wore babushkas. Women went to church with covering their hair. They felt it indecent if they didn't. You didn't bare your arms if you were a woman, if you came from a traditional immigrant community. That's the same thing that's going on there. These are immigrant groups that are assimilating. I don't think it helps when you make it an article of faith that you have to uncover yourself. I think you allow the process to evolve, as, like I said, as we did here in America. And not lose sight of the fact that within a generation, they're going to be like everybody else in the country if you let that process work itself through.
Jim, we've got about a minute remaining, and we understand that the satirical magazine in France, Charlie Hebdo, will publish its first edition since last week's attack. We also understand the cover will have a representation of the Prophet Muhammad with a tear streaming down his cheek, holding a sign that in English would say, I am Charlie, and then the banner, all is forgiven. Yeah. Will this be regarded as a provocation by the Islamic community in France?
Again, there is nothing in Islam that requires that there be no pictures of the Prophet. The idea, the iconoclasm of Islam in its origins was to not make icons so that people wouldn't worship them as, for example, we Christians will pray before a statue. They didn't want that to occur, and so they developed this notion of no icons. That is not the same as a prohibition against any images of the Prophet. And so, look, it should pass okay. I hope it does. But there are going to be those who are going to try to use it as a form of outrage, as an expression of outrage. They're going to try to make us think about it.
And we will keep our eyes peeled for that. Jim Zogby, president of the Arab American Institute, you have our thanks. Up next, Colonel Derek Harvey.